A cultura é um dos mais preciosos instrumentos de democracia. É um canal de expressão plural que permite a convivência de diferentes vozes, histórias e visões de mundo. E por isso a cultura, tal qual a democracia, deve ser defendida e fortalecida. Essa é a função da Lei Rouanet, a principal política pública de incentivo à cultura brasileira. Com ela, perseguimos a missão de assegurar o acesso democrático à produção e à difusão cultural. Ao longo de mais de 3 décadas, a Rouanet permitiu que inúmeras iniciativas culturais, antes inviáveis, ganhassem o mundo. Revelou histórias, preservou tradições e transformou vidas. Lei Rouanet, há 33 anos, tornando a cultura brasileira mais plural, acessível e democrática.
Casal de dançarinos se olham sorridentes. Uma banda orquestrada para de tocar. Logos: Lei Rouanet, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução.
Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. No poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Gostei de mato, sabe? Sempre passear, gostava muito de passear para as matas, tirar as coisas. Todo mundo que eu trabalho, quase todo mundo pergunta se eu sou índio, porque eu trabalho com essas coisas. Eu faço a peneira, faço o cesto, faço a esteira. Eu faço chá, faço xarope das medicinas, né? Tem um xarope, a gente faz um xarope muito bom, com folha, muitos tipos de folha, né? E era minha mãe, era minha avó, tudo eu gostava desse negócio de ervas, essas coisas assim. E dava muito negócio de fazer de erva. A minha mãe fazia, minha avó. O pessoal antigo usava muito negócio de chá, né? Antigamente quase não tinha médico.
Que eu aprendi com a minha avó, né? A minha avó era garrafeira, a minha avó era parteira. Ela mostrava: ó, meu filho, isso aqui é para banho. Para banho, quando a mulher está com dor, para ter criança, isso aqui é remédio. Esse aqui é remédio para bronquite. Esse aqui é remédio para isso. Eu fui aprendendo do meu pai. O meu avô era raizeiro, eu me considero como raizeiro. Isso aqui é para me provar que a natureza ensina a gente a viver, igual as pessoas antigas.
Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 23ª FLIP, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A FLIP conta com o benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 235060, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiências física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Jequitibá do Nubank. Patrocínio Figueira da Vale. Patrocínio Guapuruvu do Itaú e da Motiva, por meio do seu instituto. Patrocínio Cedro do Sesc, da MAC Móveis e de O Globo. Patrocínio Araribá, da Globo Livros. Apoio institucional da Prefeitura de Paraty, Governo do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, IFAM, Instituto do Patrimônio Histórico e Artístico Nacional e Museu do Território. É uma criação e realização Associação Casa Azul e Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. FLIP, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
dia para ti.
Good morning, Flip.
A gente vai
So
ter agora uma
we're going to
mesa
have a roundtable
quase
now,
tá virando
which
uma
is
tradição,
also becoming
que é
a
de autoras
tradition with
latino-americanas
Latin
na
American
Flip.
authors at
Esse
Flip.
ano, o
This
maior
year,
subgrupo
the
de
largest
tipos de
subgroups of
autores
types
das
of
autoras
authors is
latino-americanas.
Latin American authors, non-Brazilian Latin American authors.
Isso
Spanish
não é
speaking.
uma
This is not a
coincidência,
coincidence.
isso é movimento
This
que
is
tem
a
acontecido
movement
no
that's
mercado
happened
editorial
in the
brasileiro, que é
Brazilian
muito
publishing market, which is
muito
extremely
bonito,
important,
porque eu acho que
beautiful,
de uns
because I
anos
think
pra
that
cá, a
in
gente
the last few
começou
years
a
we've
entender
begun
que o
to
Brasil
understand
também
that
faz
Brazil
parte da
is also
América
part of
Latina.
Latin
Que
America,
ler essas
and to read
autoras
these
diz muito
authors,
mais
these
sobre
women,
a gente
tells much more
do que uma
about us
literatura
than
que a gente lia
literature that
há mais ou
we
menos 20
read
anos,
20 years
assim.
ago, right?
A gente
So
chama o
we
mercado
call
editorial de
the
cadeia do
publishing
livro
market
porque
the
realmente
book
ele é
chain
círculo
because
que
it
as
is a
coisas estão
circle
todas
where everything is
conectadas.
interconnected.
Para trazer
And
essas
to
autoras
bring these Latin American
latino-americanas, se
authors here,
formou uma
we formed
geração
a
de
generation
tradutoras,
of
de que temos
translators.
duas
We have
aqui, a
two of
Silvia
them here,
Massini
Sylvia
Félix, a Elisa
Felix,
Menezes,
Elisa
que
Menezes,
traduziram.
who translated
Mas
these books.
também tem
But
a
also
Mariana
there's
Sanches e a
Mariana
Marina
Sanchez
Vaquil, que
and
não estão,
Marina
mas que
Vaquil,
traduziram. A
who are
Marina
not here,
Vaquil
but
traduziu
she
a Dahlia
translated
Cerda. E a
Dahlia
elas
de
eu
la
agradeço
Cerda, and I want to
muitíssimo,
thank them.
fundamentais
They
para
are
esse nosso
essential
movimento
for our Latin
latino-americano.
American movement.
Agradeço
I
muito
want
a
to
vocês.
thank you
Então, eu queria
both
chamar a
and all
Gabriela
four.
Maia,
Actually,
que vai
Gabriela
mediar essa
Meyer is
conversa.
going
Boa
to
mesa
chair
pra
this
gente.
session. So let's have a entertaining roundtable, okay?
Obrigada. Olá.
Hello,
Boa tarde.
good
Eu
afternoon.
queria já
I would
chamar
like
as
to
nossas
call
convidadas, as
out our
estrelas
guest
dessa
writers,
tarde, Dahlia
the
de la
stars,
Cerda e
Dahlia de la
Dolores
Cerda
Reyes.
and
Bem-vindas.
Dolores Reyes. Welcome, indeed.
Bom, é prazer
Okay, it's a
estar
huge
aqui.
pleasure to be
Obrigada mais
here.
uma
Thank
vez
you once
pelo convite.
again
Sempre
for the
uma
invitation. It's
alegria
always a
ver esse
joy
auditório
to see
cheio,
this tent
pra ouvir
full,
conversas
to
tão
hear
boas.
such
Obrigada,
great
Ana, pelo
conversations.
convite
Thank
mais uma
you,
vez,
Anna,
e
for the
a presença
invitation
de
once
todos e
again,
todas
and
vocês.
to all of you for
Vou fazer
attending.
uma
I'm
breve
going to give a
apresentação
brief
das
introduction
autoras,
of the
pra
authors
gente começar.
for us to begin.
Dahlia de la
Dahlia de la Cerda
Cerda
is Mexican. She was born in 1985. She's a writer and activist, a co-founder and co-director of Morras Help Morras, a feminist collective that develops reproductive justice and safe abortion rights in Mexico. She's the author of Reservoir Bitches short stories. The translators are essential, as Ana said, and published here in Brazil this year by DBA. The book is competing for the International Booker Prize, one of the most important literary awards in the world. Dahlia wrote 2 books. Medea me cantou corrido, and From the Hiding Places. Dolores Reyes is Argentina. Argentine. She's a professor, feminist activist, a mother of 7 children. Dolores studied classic literature in Buenos Aires, and she has her 2 first novels already published here in Brazil. Earth Eater, which was published by and translated by Elisa Menezes, and Misery by Sylvia. Both of them are here. Both of them are published by Moinhos Publishing House. Dolores has suffered censorship since 2019 when Earth Eater was published. Some attempts to remove her books from the market, from the schools. Earth Eater last year, the book suffered an attack by the Argentinian government, which seconded criticism and amplified criticism and leading to death threats against her. We're going to be talking a little bit about this as well. Okay, great. So we agreed for them to do a reading to begin the session, for you to know a little bit about a bit of their books that are published here in Brazil. Dahlia is going to begin the reading with an excerpt that she chose herself from Reservoir Bitches.
I sat in the toilet, I peed on the pregnancy test, and I waited the longest minute of my life positive. I had a panic attack, and then I felt happiness. I caressed my belly with loving care. When I saw the scenes of those girls sitting in the toilet waiting to see whether they were pregnant, I thought that was pathetic. And this is pathetic, I thought, in spite of the fact that, to be honest, I'm used to being pathetic. That's why I identify myself with characters like Jessica Jones or Penny Lane from Almost Famous. I got up, I washed the face, I left the toilet, and I fell on the bed.
Bueno, antes que nada, gracias, estamos súper...
Before I start, thank you so much. It's so amazing to be here with this amazing crowd. It's a dream come true. I'll start with Earth Eater from the beginning. The dead don't live with the living. You have to understand, I don't care. I want to keep mom here at home in the earth. Enough. Everybody's waiting. If you don't listen to me, I eat earth. In the past, I would eat for me because I was angry, because it embarrassed them and I was embarrassed. They said that the earth is dirty, that my belly would get bloated like a frog. Get up, come on. Don't keep them waiting, wash up. Then I started to eat earth because of the other. They wanted to speak, others that have left, that are gone. What is the use of a cemetery? To bury people. Get up, dress up. I don't care. I don't care about people. Mom is mine. Mom will stay here. You look like an animal. You didn't even comb your hair. I look around the walls. Mom wanted to put bricks. The tileless roof so high, gray. The roof, the floor, and beside me, the bed where she would lie down if Dad was breaking our balls. Nobody will lie there. I cover my head with the pillow. Mom would comb me. Mom would cut my hair. You want me to drag you out of here? Don't be such a brat. You should be embarrassed of yourself today. I get up. My hair is covering my t-shirt like a curtain that is almost touching my panties. I would look for my tennis shoes, my jeans, and I keep my tears for myself. It's a fury, it's a cramp. To go to the bathroom, I have to leave the room, go through all of the people that are around my house like flies, gossiping, smoking, talking nonsense. Walter doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to leave the house. Never again, Mom and I. I put my jeans, I put the t-shirt in, I button up, I put up the zipper, and I stare at my auntie to see if for 1 minute she stopped breaking my balls. If I stand up, if I leave the room and I walk behind those hands that carry my mom's body in that cloth, it's because I had enough. I'm fed up. I want them to go away. Walter doesn't want to leave, doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to see her in silence, to fall in an empty hole in the cemetery where they bury the poor. No bronzes, no flowers, nothing. After the canes, a dry mouth that eats earth, the earth like a wound, open up. I don't want to put her hair there. I want to make her stay. I don't want to cover her. My mom is dropped in that hole. I don't have the strength. I can't do anything. The earth wrap her as my dad would hit on her. He hit her like the earth is hitting her now. That body that is stolen from me. Meantime, they're praying. What for? If in the end, removed, it's the earth. Never again, Mom and me. She goes in, they cover her. Her ears. Is she breathing? No. My ribs go in and out. I'm breathing. I remember as a nightmare the sound of that place, a waste, pestilence. Even the sun makes me feel confused. My skin is bleeding. My eyes are hurting. I'm crying. I'm trying not to cry. It's yellow fever. It's gray pain that never dies. Mom, leave you here with everyone. I don't want to leave you. I don't want my hands to leave you. Mom, you're going to stay here. I can't do it. I can only eat earth from this place. It's not an enemy anymore. The unknown land of a cemetery I will never step on. My mom, myself, you will stay here. But I will take some of this earth with me to know alone. In the dark, I close my eyes to put my hands on the earth that just covered you, Mom, and it's dark. It's night in me. I close my fists. I trap. I eat it. I take it to my mouth. The strength of the earth that devours you. It tastes like the bark of a tree. I like it. It shows me. It makes me see. It's dawn. No. It is the sun that lights up my skin, my eyes. The earth poisons me. And they say, Get up, Earth Eater, get up, let it go, let her go. But I still close my eyes. I fight against the disgust of swallowing Earth. It's not enough. I want more. I'm not leaving without seeing, without knowing. Somebody says, leave the Earth alone, forces me to open my eyes. My mom is there in that cloth. Who will talk to me now? Without you, I'm nothing, Mom. I don't want to be. The Earth has spoken. They shake her. It's not like my dad hitting the fury of the fists as holes in the flesh. My dad, hands like my hands, strong arms in that fist that hit your heart and your flesh, and something like a river that's leaving. Dying Mom, cutting fresh from us too. Get up, Earth Eater, get up once and for all. Let it go. Let your mom go.
Great. I'm going to begin by talking about Earth Eater. Dolores, if you need the translation, feel free. I can understand you in Portuguese. Thank you, anyway. I'll try at least. I said in the introduction in your presentation concerning the attempts at censorship of your book and the threats that you've suffered. Earth Eater, in short, without a spoiler, it's the story of a girl who has visions and she is able to find or understand what happened with people that have disappeared based on a connection that she has to the earth that she eats, or the dirt that she eats. And several people who have disappeared that she searches for are victims of femicide. So why do you think that this story was seen as such a threat?
Oh my God. That's such a difficult question, actually, but it's a necessary question. I asked myself more than once. And fortunately, I feel that the Argentine government not only does not care, they don't want to talk about femicide, let alone disappeared people. And Earth Eater is a character that looks for girls and women that have gone missing, girls and boys that are missing, the dear ones that are no longer there. It bothers the power because in a way, even though it's fiction writing, fiction has this power to make a reader follow an experience that is symbolic as reading a book. And that reader is moved. And then this reader will intervene in society with an experience that this person didn't have before. I was born in 1978 in Argentina, in the middle of Jorge Rafael Videla's dictatorship with 30,000 disappeared persons. It's impossible to talk about in Argentina about the disappeared people without thinking about that burden, that semantic burden, that terrible semantic burden of the word. And I grew up seeing organizations of women that were looking for their daughters and their sons in the earth, unfortunately, as an appalling reality, as a literary metaphor. And I understand a lot about this topic, and I understand that a denial government that denies all of these violences is bothered by a character like the Earth Eater, that she never uses her power for herself. She puts her power at the service of those that are looking for somebody, those that need to find somebody, those that are suffering the despise of life and the impunity that we women suffer throw at our face in all of the continent.
Dahlia, violence is also a central part of the short stories in Reservoir Bitches. Stories that look like a novel because the characters reappear. They appear in more than one short story. You know from different angles the same character in your short stories. So it's like a novel, but in your short stories, the women are not just victims of violence. Several of them also embrace violence as part of their life, and they themselves themselves become aggressors. This happens with several characters in the book, but I given Juliana, who's the daughter of a drug dealer, who takes revenge on the assassin of a friend. I'm giving her example because in an interview, Rui Souza Gibel in O Globo, you said that you also write to solve an ethical dilemma with revenge. So the reader is encouraged to ask themselves what justice is and if it's valid and to take revenge. Have you gotten an answer for yourself concerning this issue of revenge, and has this answer changed? I believe that one of the lessons that activism has left me, or what I was a militant in accompanying victims, because the search for justice and pursuit of justice and truth for the victims entered into a moral conflict with my own ideals. And I'll give you an example. I write about women who are disgusted and about women who take revenge against their aggressors or do what they can with what they have. In this case, Juliana, he wants to take revenge for an assassination of her sister. So it's a way of problematizing violence about readers, for readers to reflect on it. It makes it easier to find justice oftentimes through literature than in reality, for example, in Mexico. But when I accompanied the victims who were seeking justice, the victims, side victims, like the mothers of girls that had been assassinated, I entered into an ethical conflict because at the individual level, outside, my life as a writer, I'm anti-punishment. I want to use against using punishment as a form of justice. I'm against incarceration. I believe that jails need to be the last option. Of course, I'm against incarceration of minors, and I believe that there should be alternatives to prison. But if I find a mother where a minor kills her daughter, and this woman said, I want this teenager, 16-year-old teenager who's a murderer, spend the rest of his life in jail, in prison. I could not deal with it because the mother of the victim and the victim, side victim, the collateral victim, but it was against my ethical principles. But I could not say to the mother who's suffering, the search for justice that you're trying to find is incorrect. I couldn't say that a person is going to be in jail for 40 years. I could not do this and find justice otherwise. I decided to no longer accompany that person, to decide to dedicate myself to writing on these problems, problematizing them. We know teenage offenders or adolescents who have killed somebody, but also who have a story of violence, a background of violence, where everyone is accomplices to guarantee the structural conditions and structured conditions for a child and an adolescent could develop their life with dignity and have a decent life with tools to tie to others without violence. So it would be interesting to use this through literature in daily life. The truth is that there are real cases. It's very complex. When I've known victims who have taught me that they wanted to kill somebody, get me somebody who want to kill that person. So how do you confront the pain of the victims, and how do you use your own moral and ethics? It's something I could not do in my follow-up of those victims, so I do it through literature exclusively, no longer in reality. Do you glimpse literature as a space which can also be violence? I remember several years ago, the Argentine writer Camila Vilares was here, and Flip Souza Vilares, she said a phrase that I never forgot, which is sometimes the first violence that we suffer is the word, right? Do you believe that to write can be a form of aggression? Well, I was recently giving a presentation in Colonia Morelos in Mexico City, which is known as a violent neighborhood, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods and stigmatized neighborhoods in Mexico. And I went with a person from Tepito, with a girl from the LGBT community, who is Tepito. This is a native from Tepito. He was developing a concept which is called revenge literature, suffering violence. My own work in Dolores, it's literature, which, and Camila is also the literatures which come precisely to grasp insults and turn it back, return it back, give it back. Most Latin American people, if you belong to high marginalization context, if you have some otherness, it's a kind of a woman, for example, a person in the LGBT community, a racialized person or trans woman, you're going to be insulted through words. They're going to call you a whore, you're going to call you a butch, and you're going to try to hurt you with their words. So literature is this kind of literature which take these insults and they convert it into something aesthetic, beautiful, and they turn it back, they return it, bounce it back. So I think that the word in literature oftentimes can be used as aggression. In literature, we don't want literature that rapes people or racializes people, but also I think that literature can be converted into literature for revenge, to turn the insult back on the insulter. Okay, this roundtable is called To Be a Woman in Latin America. Being a woman in Latin America. In your books, Dolores, women never persist. They die or have to leave, so they never remain. They have to escape or flee. They don't stay. And when they do stay, the future possibilities always seem very narrow. And there's a time in the story of Earth Eater where she finishes high school. She drops out rather before she finishes, and she realized that she didn't get married or get pregnant, unlike the others, and she sort of doesn't know what the future holds for her. So the possibilities appear very narrow and limited. Do you think that this is trustworthy? Being a woman in Latin America is having narrow futures?
Well, in spite of the fact that I'm not the best example, to get married and have children is not the only possible future for women. There are many other futures that are possible. And I believe that in my first novel, Earth Eater, she's a little girl. I mean, she was 7, 8, and the span of time is like 10 years in the novel. And she discovers that she has a gift to eat earth, the earth that you step on, where you were born, or where your body that was raped was thrown away, and see parts of your life and know what happened. That's her gift. She's not a superhero from Marvel Comics that she stops the train with her hand or bullets worth her chest. No, she has a gift that in our society acquires a gigantic dimension because of the violence I was talking about. What Dahlia just mentioned, it's re-signified, and she is looked for by people, and she also goes out and encounters this destiny that she didn't know. The examples of her neighborhood are those examples that are the references I had when I was a little girl, when I was a teenager. Nobody ever told me, you can write, you can become an artist, you can travel. I mean, I left Argentina for the first time with Earth Eater, and yes, I raised my children for many, many years. I was married twice to marriages that failed. There are many other possible futures and destinies. Of course, Dahlia, she didn't even know that her role was to accompany victims, accompany women, diversities. I feel that actually It is the destiny that we find along the way of our lives. I don't know if we are ready. I don't even know if there's a school. I wonder if there could exist a school that would teach us, yes, we have the tools, but these new destinations, this new fate is built collectively by women together in the streets. Women getting together to tell their woes and talking about their fears, getting together, going out to look for their daughters. They accompany one another in this path, in the search of justice that has so many difficult places. Discussions, it is our common destiny. It is not related to the mandates in society, which are the source, the terrible source of violence. I loved the previous question you asked. What is the use of language? What is the purpose of literature? Are they an answer that wants to fight against this reality? I think yes, because language, it is the territory of the struggle. It is always where we fight the battle for the meaning and signification. I was tired, fed up of the alleged destiny of women represented in such an ordinary way in media, in movies, in series, in the movies, whatever, and in literature as well. That's commonplace. I mean, they never talked about how we deliver babies, childbirth. It was such a stereotype. You arrive out of control, screaming, sweating. They say, breathe, breathe. You lie down. They give you the anesthetic. Push, push. Lying down. And then blood. She is pushing and pushing. And then a male physician appears with a 4-month baby, huge, enormous, pinky, and you are bathed in blood like a massacre, butchered in childbirth. An insult, an insult. I mean, and it's, of course, I want to go in my second novel, Misery, the main character. She gives birth when she is 18, and she talks about her birth experience. I also gave birth in one of the peripheries in Buenos Aires. I gave birth at 16, me and a lot of girlfriends. So we built from a different space something that is despite. Who said that the experience of giving birth is not material in literature? Or is it only that would interest some of us only? No, of course not all of us. All women deliver. We are born or we give birth. This has been so important. Why can't this be literature? Why in the male and chauvinist literary scene we have to talk about births in those words? It's not an insult. You can convert with a word, and we have found our own way of speaking.
E tem algo que você falou dessa busca por justiça, né, que é
search for justice is a long process, and apparently also there's a search for words at the end of the day, because these are people who are attempting to name what happened to them and what exists in the future in terms of possibilities. You talked in your first answer about the disappeared person, and I thought of this experience of language when I read your books, where there are disappearances in different contexts. What disappears when a person disappears in addition to the body, the life? What disappears? And how do you narrate what is not there, the absence or disappearance?
Oh my God, such a difficult question, but I love it because I feel that I'm thinking about this all the time, and it's exactly what I don't want to happen. I don't want this narration, this storytelling be just one hardened, armored. Reality surpasses us. In each of the novels I write, I know that there will be a flood of people that will come to me to tell me their story. Sometimes I participate in literary festivals and there's a young girl that says, you know what, I didn't want to be a mother, I never had children, but a couple of months ago my sister was killed and her spouse is in the jail, and she has 3 children. She was chopped up, her pieces scattered. We never found her body to say goodbye. And I always try to be very careful when I tell the disappearance, especially of women, because I feel that there's an industry behind this, and words can even be terribly violent and generate a sort of horrible enjoyment, as if it were a pleasure in the disgust of this violence. Even when I go to Mexico or I travel, and in the newspapers, in that front page, they put the picture of the chopped body of a woman, the chest, the leg. And I mean, how do children grow up seeing the 133 stabs and the murdered and butchered and raped women? How do children grow up in this environment, seeing these pictures? So I'm very careful when I choose the words to talk about these disappearances and murders. I don't want this to be an enjoyment spectacle to keep on violating women after death. On the contrary, Earth Eater is the daughter of a femicide. She has lost her mother. I'm not spoiling the novel, mind you. In the first chapter, you see that the main character, Earth Eater, has lost her mom. And she eats earth because she doesn't want to lose her mom. She eats the earth of the graveyard where her mom is buried. And she discovers that she has this gift. She sees the last scenes of the life of her mom. She sees what happens, and I'm very careful. And she, Earth Eater, is very careful when she tells the family members that are looking for their missing ones this story.
There's a challenge in this choice of language. Dahlia, violence is sometimes very shocking in your book's stories, but at the same time, it's banal and becomes banal. There are very different moments. People say, fine, it was just a problem, I'm past it now. Even in situations that are extremely violent, it's as if it were just something minor. I think we're experiencing this dilemma with violence because we get used to it, and when we realize we are taking it for granted, violence, which is very significant. And this intrigues me when I think about violence as raw material for literature, as a theme in literature, because if we have as our point of departure our hypothesis that art is done through uncanniness, how is it possible to practice art to cause uncanniness based on something which has been taken for granted? What possibilities do we have with language to create this uncanniness even when people are getting used to it? This is a difficult question because, especially in Mexico, we have violence which is taken for granted almost. And besides the former president, Felipe Calderón, he stated a war on drug trafficking, but in fact it was a war on drugs which didn't affect the drug traffic very much or organized crime, but the violence that was unleashed affected citizens, Mexican citizens, more than the drug traffic. At the roots of this, we ended up witnessing a wave of violence which spread all across Mexico. Mexico has always been a complicated country, but in many contexts, it ended up becoming impossible to live these contexts or settings. There were newspapers, as commented by Dolores, where the front pages we saw people that had been quartered, hanging from bridges, decapitated, and this was taken for granted. Recently, this was banned, for example, in the case of a woman called Ingrid. whose femicide was exposed in the newspapers, and the images were banned. But for a long time in Mexico, this was routine to walk on the street and to see in the newsstands people that were quartered, decapitated, women murdered, and the headlines, I'm not going to repeat here, but they were horrible, but this taking violence for granted. Some cities like Coyoacán, in some towns, this violence is daily. It happens constantly, and you need to live with it because you cannot just close off at home and stay at home. Unfortunately, in the capitalist system like ours, we need to work to be able to eat, to have some kind of income to support the house and the family. So in Mexico, we have learned to not ignore, even though it is daily, and pretending that we don't see this deplorable violence. It's there, but we need to continue with our lives. We need to go out to work one way or another. So even though we are afraid of being murdered out on the town square, we have to go to work. So let's say you may not take your cell phone on a public bus because they end up stealing your cell phone, and then they extort you, or rather you sell the cell phones, actually, the second-hand cell phones, or retread cell phones, and they use them to rob other cell phones. For me, literature has served to understand, for me to understand that in Mexico at this time there is a major recruitment of teenagers and children by organized crime. And society, Mexican society, even though it takes it for granted, violence, there is still pushback in Mexico, at least when, in a word, when a boy who is recruited by organized crime is murdered or he dies, people also celebrate. They celebrate that there's one less criminal on the streets. So this it's difficult to have people to empathize or sympathize with a person who's been recruited by organized crime. It's important for them to understand that behind the child there's a child with whom everyone, we've failed as a society. We've failed that child as a society, and that is what these children, oftentimes, they see themselves in a difficult situation, and organized crime offers them the possibilities for having access not only to a lot of weapons, but also a lot of money for their families. And literature that allows for people to understand this, it allows for people to sympathize with people with whom they wouldn't have much empathy for otherwise. And this is polarizing. They accuse me oftentimes of romanticizing or novelizing delinquents, and I don't want to aestheticize violence. That was they accused me of defending delinquents, but there are also other people who come up to me and they say, thanks to your book, I understood that the outlaws are also people. And oftentimes it's difficult to understand the worst delinquent is also a human being. But when somebody understands this or based on literature, this is what I intend to do with my writing. And you mentioned this experience of having to leave, not staying home. You had to go out to survive. You had to go out to work. You had to go out to do things and to be outdoors and out of your home, exposed to violence outside. But for women, inside the house is also a space for violence. There was a round table talking about the home, looking at the home as a space of work, forced labor, right, of care, unpaid work, and unpaid care. But it's also the house is space for violence for a lot of women, not by coincidence. Femicides are committed by their partners or former partners. How do you view the home, and how do you organize this tension between indoors and outdoors? Dahlia.
A realidade é que o feminicídio é fenômeno muito complexo.
Very complex phenomenon.
Há também
There
feminicídios
are also
que chamamos de
femicides, which we
íntimos, que
call
acontecem dentro
domestic
das casas.
femicides.
E é uma
In the
questão
family
que eu usei
context,
para a escrita do meu livro, mas
when I
a
wrote my book,
realidade
but the
é
reality
que
is
no
that in Mexico,
essa guerra contra
this
o
war on
narcotráfico,
drugs,
a
the
disponibilidade de armas de
availability of
fogo no espaço
weapons,
público,
firearms in the public
isso
space,
mudou
all of
as
this changed the
dinâmicas no que
dynamic
diz
with
respeito à
regard to the
perigosidade que
danger
sofrem as
that
mulheres.
women suffer.
Então, antes,
So
o perigo era a
the
sua
danger used to
casa
be just the
e a
home
potência
and
do
the power
feminicídio
of
também,
femicide as
mas
well. But
o potencial
the
do
potential
feminicídio
of
vinha
femicide
por parte
came
de alguém que
from
dizia
someone who
amá-la,
said
seu
that
pai,
they
seu
loved
marido,
their husband or their
seu
father,
companheiro.
or
Agora,
their partner.
pelo fato
But
de
now
que
there's the fact that
armas de fogo
there are
nas ruas,
firearms on
isso
the streets. This
mudou
changed
como os
the way that
feminicídios são
femicides are
realizados e
committed
aonde há
and where.
feminicídios
Femicide
agora
now,
nas ruas.
there are femicides on the streets.
Muitas vezes
Oftentimes,
os violentadores,
abusers,
enfim, os criminosos,
the criminals
são de dentro de casa, mas enfim,
in the
muitos
home
veem
itself,
o
but
crime
a lot of
organizado
them
que
see
tem
organized
armas à
crime. They have
disposição.
firearms
Os
available.
últimos feminicídios
The most
que
recent
foram publicados
femicides
são
published
que
are
foi
which
contra
were
uma menina chamada
against a girl called
Valéria
Valéria
na televisão
on
enquanto
TV
ela
while
estava
she was
transmitindo as
broadcasting
notícias
the news
ao vivo.
live.
Ela era
She
noiva de
was engaged to a member of
crime organizado
organized
e ele
crime,
mandou
and
matá-la.
he
E a
ordered
outra
her
grande
to be
notícia foi
killed.
uma
And another
menina que
news
estava na
was a
sua
girl who was
casa.
at home,
Ela
and she
começa
began
ela foge dele e porque ela já
flees
tinha
her
dito que não
partner
queria
because
saber nada
she
dele,
wanted to
etc.,
separate
mas
from the
ele
partner, the
pega
boyfriend, but
revólver
he
e a
takes a
mata. Então,
gun and kills her.
isso
So this
não significa
doesn't mean
somente o
only
fato
the
que os
fact
homens
that the
são
men
machistas,
are
mas
chauvinists,
esses
but
crimes se
these crimes
alimentam de
are
outras questões
fed by
sociais,
other
como por
social
exemplo a
issues, as for example, the
disponibilidade de armas
available
de fogo.
firearms.
Antes, por exemplo,
Previously, in the
agora
past,
há
now,
muito mais crimes e
there are many more
feminicídios
crimes and
causados por
femicides
armas de
caused by
fogo, porque
firearms
antes
because it used
era
to be that they were
estrangulamento,
strangled,
etc. Agora
etc.
eles têm
Now
armas de
they
fogo
have
e
firearms
podem
and they can
atirar contra as
shoot
mulheres.
the women.
E o espaço
And the
público
public
é um
space
espaço
is a
muito
very
violento
violent
e
space,
muitas
and
mulheres
a lot of
agora
women now
já não
no
encontram
longer
espaço seguro
find a
nas
safe
ruas
place on the
e
streets.
encontram
They
espaço
find
seguro
a
nas casas
safe
delas,
space in
onde
their own
elas
homes where they
encontram
find
espaço
a
mais
space that
seguro.
is
Então
safer.
isso
So
muda de
this
como
changes the way
as
that
mulheres são
women
assassinadas,
are
quais são
murdered
os
and
lugares seguros.
the
Isso
safe
depende
places.
dos
This depends
contextos.
on the context.
Em contextos de bairros ou
Neighborhoods
racializados,
or
é uma coisa
racialized
que pode
context
te
is something
proteger
that can protect you
da violência
from
fora da
violence
casa, mas você
out
pode
of the
sofrer
home,
uma
but you can
violência dentro
suffer
da
violence
casa.
in
E
your
isso é
home.
tema
And
muito
this is a very
complexo, porque
complex
não é
issue because
somente
it's
uma
not
questão
only an
de
issue,
os lugares
there are
onde as
places where
mulheres
women
podemos estar em
can be
segurança.
safe, right?
Então,
So
é uma questão muito
it's a very
complexa.
complex issue.
Os feminicídios têm sido
Femicides have been a recurrent theme
literatura feita por mulheres
literature by women in Latin America. In addition to you two, several other writers deal with this issue of femicides. Writers from several different countries here from Brazil and the neighboring countries. And
dá para, obviamente,
obviously you can understand why, because they're everywhere. In Brazil last year, there were almost 1,500 femicides that were recorded, which means that there were more than almost 5 per day. So it's impossible to open up the newspaper or TV on news on TV and not see a femicide. We're all exposed to information that femicides are happening here in Brazil and elsewhere in Latin America. Dolores, why do you think that men are not writing about femicide?
Claro, nem todo homem.
Well, men are always writing about femicide. The Intruder by Jorge Luis Borges, two brothers that kill one of the brother's wife, but before they rape her, use her body. We can talk about the history of America literature written by men. Bolaño, 2066, Sire, in Scars, where the plot is fury and his wife. She doesn't even have a name. The 1st of May. Another novel, The Research by Juan José Sayre. There is a killer that kills old ladies. He lives in France and kills old ladies. Sabato, one of the most important writers in Argentina, Sabato, The Tunnel. There is a murderer that is trapped. It's a psychological thriller on a femicide. There is a lot of literature about male writers. The thing is that the difference is that they wrote from their perspective. The bodies of women do not bleed. There is no loss. There is no pain. There is no violence. Women have no voice. Women are like the final bullet. The bullet falls down, and then I don't know what it was. I don't remember. I was out of my mind. I went crazy. There is no registration of loss, pain, violence, just the storytelling of the life that is lost. But this life is described and narrated, written from the perspective of a man that I was not interested on, which was always the case in literature. Half of the name of these books written by very important writers in Argentina, I read them in high school, I read them at the university with many, many other books. But what we never saw, or at least what I never found, was what is going on now. The change in the perspective, that is, to tell the story from the focus, which is violence against women, violence towards these very young bodies, which are the ones that suffer violence the most. Not only chauvinist, femicide violence, the domestic, classist violence, economic, racial violence, gender violence, all of the violences, something that I had in mind when I started writing Earth Eater and Misery, is to try to change this perspective and write from this place, because I had never read about these voices in literature, or I had read it very few times. La China Aaron or Selva Amada, Dead Girls. Selva Amada wrote this novel about killed girls. Selva Amada, an Argentine writer. We have to think about our own experience and tell our stories from a different expectation, from a different place, with a different voice, which I believe is what I'm interested on doing. I want to break with this very effective tool we use in violence to erase, to silence victims. That is, the shame and the lack of tools that raped women have had, and their families. In The Invincible Summer of Liliana by Cristina Rivera Garzón, that is in Flip, we didn't even have elements of language to tell what happened, to talk about what happened in our countries that we're now talking about.
What do you think awakened people's interest? Yesterday we were talking, I said that I mediate a book club and people, a reading club. People choose the books, and all the time people want to read women, contemporary women in Latin America. What do you think that awakened this great interest and their curiosity and the desire to read these stories?
Well, I feel that women have always written. We have always written. And the thing is that maybe we were not published, or books didn't circulate, these books, these stories, as today. When I was studying at university, I remember Clarice Lispector. And I mean, passion, according to GH, was like a train that ran me over. I said, wow, what has this writer done with language? But it was not that easy to get her books. They didn't circulate. Clarice had to come back to Brazil because she wasn't published in Brazil. And I know that there is an interest, and we have a lot of readers. But I think it has to do with that, with the fact that, yes, our books are there. We come to fairs. We come to meet our readers, which for me is the most beautiful part of traveling, to come to a book fair. We leave a lot of material of new writers, those that are writing now. But the great women in the Americas that are writers, the legacy exist. They are there. Now they're starting to publish these women. Their novels have been forgotten. They have never been published as they deserved. They were erased and forgotten. I don't know what's the case in Brazil, but in my country, at least, I would read the books that my brothers traveled to the center of the earth, Tom Sawyer, the adventure books, and I could go to the adventure with a male character with no problem. I liked it. We talked about the Iliad, the Odyssey, but the other way around did not exist. The books that I read with women characters, they were just girl stuff, and they would never read them. My brothers would never read them. Little Women, Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, let alone. I mean, no reader today cares about those books. If she's a women writer, a trans writer, any identity, female, I mean, they don't care. They read the books because they want to read them, because they are original, creative. There are new voices that were marginalized in the past, and there is a disruption in language, what I see as an interesting new thing, because language is never the plot of a character. There is a state of the language, the voice, an innovation, a use of the language, which the marginalized sectors, the despised and neglected, they are very creative and playful, even inventive when they use language. So there is an interest, even because of that, interested in women, because there is a renewal in the form, not only in plots.
This question goes to Dahlia. What awakened people's interest in female writers? Women have always written, so why has this interest increased so much recently? One of the things that I do the most is to participate in readers' clubs. 4 hours a week, I dedicate myself to the readers' clubs with people all over the world. I think it's interesting that 70% of these readers' clubs, book clubs, are women who read women authors. So we are women who read women's work. There are also book clubs that are mixed, but even in these mixed clubs, most of the participants are women and few men. Recently, El País published an article saying that most of the members of book clubs are women, and I believe that most of the readers are women as well right now. And as a reader, I can say that when I was a teenager, I read a lot of books, adventure books, and I loved horror stories. And when I grew up, I began to change my opinion, change my mind. I read an article where a man complained that we women were single-theme people. We wanted to talk about motherhood, femicide, and disappearance. But a time came in my life when I began to ask myself about men. Aren't you tired of yourselves? Because most of the books that I read were about men who raped women, and the introspection was the crisis of a 60, 70-year-old man who was sad because he was in love. He was 60 years old and in love for Lolita. So 27 years of age, I thought, okay, wow, I have to read something written by a 70-year-old man who is sad because he is not able to get a virgin to abuse her sexually. I cannot continue to read that in my life, right?
Se até o meu esposo é o primeiro na família dele que terminou a escola. E ele tentou ler Gabriel Garcia Marques, ele pegou o livro Memórias de Minhas Putas Tristes e tratava-se de pedófilo. Ele me passou o livro e eu falei, eu não quero ler. Ele mesmo me dizia, como é que eu posso me interessar em ler a história de um homem, um velho que quer agredir sexualmente uma menina? Porque é isso que ele faz.
That's what he did. Memories of My Sad Horse. Welcome to the story of universal literature where women, we are for centuries the object of men's fantasies. So we women believe are tired of reading men telling these stories, and I win.
Muitas vezes eu decidi não ler mais algo escrito por homem, a não ser que ele reflita sobre um tema que me importa de fato. Eu li, por exemplo, autores racializados que fazem reflexões sobre a racialidade e como a masculinidade pode ser construída a partir da raça. Isso pode ser interessante, mas não quero mais ler livros sobre homens que querem violentar jovens.
Young girls, like Lolita.
Agora, ainda que as mulheres
although women always have written, I would like to talk about this permission to write in this same roundtable about the home. This Chilean writer, Ale Trabuco, talked about. Zeran asked a question, which is important to ask: who has the ownership? Who owns the words? Who can say things? Who is authorized to say these things? Laricera in Reservoir Pictures, the narrator said that being a woman is a state of emergency. And next she says there is no seating in the heaven when they say that our body belongs to them. Do you think that writing is a way of liberating the body or freeing the body?
Mas escrever é uma maneira de libertar o corpo, mas também de libertar muitos outros sentidos. Tem uma coisa que me parece que acontece há muitos homens na internet, que é onde eu vi eles lendo o que as pessoas dizem, que muitos homens estão zangados porque dizem que são tempos bons para ser difíceis para ser escritores e que as mulheres estamos alienadas com as vontades da indústria editorial, mas é muito mais complexo. Mas esses senhores veem as coisas assim, mas a realidade é que há artigo que diz ao mesmo tempo que quando uma minoria fala, ou quando pessoas que historicamente foram silenciadas falam, as pessoas que as ouvem têm a impressão de que estão dizendo mais coisas do que parece que estão dizendo. E a história, as editoras, na grande maioria de homens, sendo que cada vez mais há mulheres, mas os homens continuam a serem publicados mais, e há uns senhores que realmente, os homens que publicam com o nome de uma mulher, e isso fica normalizado. Então me parece que no final das contas, as mulheres estamos tomando a palavra, é uma maneira de libertação, de ressurreição, é uma ferramenta
resurrection. It's a political tool, writing, but we don't talk so much about.
Não falamos tanto como pensam que estamos falando. Me parece que a indústria das editoras
publishing industry, I think, continues to be
mercado machista.
Chauvinist market, a male chauvinist market, and we are somewhat taking a little bit this market and taking possession of it. The men are afraid because they are unable to talk about their own fantasies, assaulting and abusing women. And Brazil is an example where the women writers who have written that shows that writing can be a tool for liberation. Like Carolina Maria de Jesus, child of the dark who lived in a favela, she uses writing as a tool for liberation.
A Comitê Revolta.
Earth Eater again. You continue her story in another novel, and now you're attempting to disconnect the evidence that showed such terrible things to her. The first thing that I wanted to ask you is about this. Did you want to give her another chance? Did you want to give another chance to Earth Eater? Is that why you chose to continue her story?
Yes. No, not at all. It has to do with a more terrible thing. Earth Eater was published in 2019 in Argentina, and in 2020 with a pandemic. And the news we had in my country, at least, had to do with a total setback. All of the tools that we had woven and conquered and building amongst ourselves of care, accompanying one another, preventing violences or doing something against gender violence had been totally dismantled. And many women were trapped for months with their aggressors. So the 147 telephone line that was a helpline for femicides were collapsed, totally collapsed. And the answer was to write. It is not an isolated fact. It's something that happens all the time. When I see the news, when I read the news, I run the risk of becoming paralyzed because of the violence, of the desperation, of the loneliness. But a way that I found to actively answer to these situations, instead of being paralyzed, is to write down. And I answer in this way because I'm interested of the answer I will give you, to write with my body. Write with my body in a moment in which bodies are erased. Bodies are totally erased, and in social media we represent it in a way that it's not real. I'm totally interested in writing in Earth Eater and in Misery about the body experience with the 5 senses: touch, see, smell the earth, feel the taste when you swallow it, a way as to reverting the dictatorship of the sight, the look of the eyes on the bodies of women, which is totally naturalized. We've grown up listening to any guy, any man, any uncle, neighbor, to talk about our bodies all the time. Tell their minds. If you're breastfeeding, any guy can come up and say something, why here, there. I mean, a person that will never breastfeed in their lives, why are they talking about me? And I mean, if you're thin, you're fat, you're gained weight, you lost weight, you feel insecure of the body changes at the different moments of your life, always stared at with so many terrible psychological consequences because of this judgment on your body. I wanted to shift this dictatorship on our bodies, on women's bodies, and these characters inhabit other body dimensions, which are a place of self-knowing, intervening in reality from a different perspective and a different space, which is more interesting. From a different perspective and look at these erased bodies, invisible bodies, which I see in my society in Latin America.
You talked about power, about our bodies and power. Picking up on that, when you open up with Reservoir Bitches, there's an abortion, a raw description of abortion. You work with supporting women who want to have safe abortions. This is a dear issue extremely dear to Latin American women. It's an area where countries are in different moments in this discussion. Here in Brazil, it's virtually banned when you talk about this, or censored. When you talk about it, it's like yesterday I was telling them scenes that we've had in the National Congress here in Brazil. which ban make it impossible to have any debate about abortion. When you talked about literature as a field of dispute, right? Literature, can it be a field of dispute to talk about abortion as well?
Definitivamente.
Sim, com
Yes,
certeza.
yes, of course.
O que aconteceu,
What
por exemplo,
happened, for
comigo
example,
aqui
with
quando
me
eu lia
is when I read
literatura,
literature,
nós estamos falando
we're
de
talking
feminicídio
about
de uma
femicide from a perspective,
crítica,
a critical perspective,
para
right?
não falar de
Not to
olhar
mention
feminino.
a
Estamos falando
feminist
de vários temas que
view. We're talking about various
dizem
different
respeito a
issues
nós
which relate
mulheres, mas
to
para
us
mim
women,
fazia
but for
falta
me,
ler sobre
I miss
aborto.
talking,
E ler
reading
sobre
about
aborto a
abortion
partir
and
de
to
uma
read about
perspectiva não
abortion from a
estigmatizante,
non-stigmatizing
mas
perspective, but
falando sobre aquilo
talking
que
and
é
reading
uma
about what
experiência
the
comum
experience is. It's a
para
common experience
mulheres
for
com
women
capacidade
with the
de
capacity
gestação.
to
Nós
become pregnant. So
passamos por uma
we
situação de
go through a
aborto, seja
situation of
porque
abortion,
passamos
whether
por isso de
we
forma
go through
voluntária
it
ou involuntária,
in a
ou
voluntary,
porque
involuntary
alguém
way, or
próximo a
someone
nós vai
close to us
abortar de
is
forma
going to have an
voluntária
abortion,
ou espontânea.
either
Se
a
você não
miscarriage
conhece nenhuma
or
amiga, tia,
induced
mãe
abortion.
ou
If you don't
parente
know
que não
a
abortou, é
mother,
porque não tiveram
aunt,
confiança em você para te contar.
that's never told you about
A
their abortion, it's
verdade
because they
é
didn't trust
que
enough to tell
a
you about it.
maioria das
The
mulheres,
majority
nós
of women,
sabemos
we
de alguém
know
que passou por
somebody
isso ou
who
passamos
went
por
through that
isso.
experience, or we've gone through it ourselves. So I
Recebo mensagens
receive
de
messages
meninas
from
em processo
girls
de aborto, e
who
se
are
eu demoro 2
experiencing an
minutos
abortion
para
that
elas
takes
responderem,
2
elas ficam
minutes for
muito
them. If I
ansiosas.
take
Por
2
quê?
minutes to
Porque
answer,
estão
they get
sozinhas a
anxious
maioria das
because
vezes.
mostly they're
E o
often
que
alone,
acontece
almost always alone, these girls. So
é
I
que
try to
eu
answer
vi
quickly.
isso, então,
I've seen that
como uma experiência
as an
cotidiana.
experience, a
Eu vim
daily
de uma
experience.
cidade
I
de
come from a
1,5
town
milhão
of 1.5 million
habitantes
inhabitants,
5, 6
and
casos
5,
por
6
dia chegavam
cases
até
per
mim de
day
mulheres da minha
came to me
cidade.
of
Ou
women in my
seja,
city.
quando me dei conta,
When I
eu
realized
pensei,
it, I
caramba,
thought,
20%
wow,
das mulheres
20%
dessa
of the
cidade
women in this
passaram
city
por
have
aborto.
experienced an
Por
abortion.
que é que nós não
Why
falamos
don't we
isso?
talk about this,
Né?
right?
Por que que
Why
não falamos
why don't we
disso
talk
com mais
about
naturalidade,
this
como
in a more
semana
natural
passada
way?
eu
Like last
abortei?
week,
Da
I had
mesma
an
forma como
abortion,
falamos
right?
de
Just as we
parto, de
talk about
maternidade abertamente,
childbirth
por
and
que não
motherhood
falarmos de aborto como
opening.
mais um
Why
processo
don't we
na
talk
vida
about abortion, one more
reprodutiva de
process in a
mulheres e
woman's
pessoas com capacidade de
reproductive life
gestar?
and with childbearing
Por
age
que
women?
manter
Well,
isso
why keep this
na clandestinidade? Eu não
underground?
falo só
I don't talk
dos
only
médicos,
about
mas
the
falo
doctors,
disso
but
como
I'm
uma
talking about this as
experiência,
an
uma
experience
muito íntima
which
que
is very
acaba
intimate and which ends
criando
up creating
estigmas. Eu
stigma,
conheço
stigmata.
meninas de
I know
13
girls
anos
13
que
years
chegam
old
a
who
mim me
come to
pedindo
me
ajuda
asking
já
for help.
grávidas
They're
de
already
20
pregnant,
semanas.
20
Elas
weeks
querem
pregnant. They
abortar,
want
mas
to
durante
have an
todas
abortion,
as
but
20 semanas
during the
não
20 weeks,
encontraram
they
ninguém,
didn't find
uma mãe, uma
anyone,
tia,
neither a
uma irmã,
mother,
uma
an aunt,
professora
a
que
sister, or
pudesse
teacher who could
acompanhá-las ou
accompany them to
informá-las
the
para que
abortion
elas
or
pudessem
give them information for them to
começar
be
o
able to begin the
processo do
process of
aborto.
the
O aborto
abortion.
é tema tabu.
Abortion is taboo as a theme.
Por
For example,
uma moça
a
contou
girl
para a irmã que
told
ela
her
tinha
sister that she had had an
rompendo esse
abortion,
tabu, e acabou
breaking the
descobrindo que a
taboo,
irmã
and she
também já
discovered
tinha
that
passado por
sister had already had an abortion, right?
Nós
Without telling her before.
precisamos
We need
falar de
to talk
aborto
about abortion
da mesma maneira como,
just as we talk
olha,
about,
você
look,
fala
you
sobre
talk
molar
about
que você arrancou, parto que você
molar, a
teve,
tooth they had
enfim,
pulled out,
isso
or a cold,
Isso
or
tem que
whatever.
fazer parte de uma
This has to be
conversa
part of a
mais cotidiana e não
conversation,
só parte da esfera
routine
política e
conversation,
da
not just in the
esfera da
political sphere
militância.
and that of activism.
Por lado,
On
nós
the
temos
one hand, we
também
also have
duas
two
regras,
different
né,
rules,
duas medidas,
right?
né? Se você quiser abortar,
If you want to have an
as pessoas vão
abortion,
dizer, olha,
people
talvez
say,
seja
okay,
bebê que
perhaps
queira ser
it's a
engenheiro
baby
quando
that
crescer e você vai
wants to
Mas se
earn
você
money when they
perde
get older, but you're going to
bebê
kill that baby. But if
naturalmente
you
de mês,
lose, have a miscarriage,
e você já tinha
and you've already
humanizado essa
had
criança pensando que dia
thought
ia
and
virar
idealized that they're going to be an engineer, people are going to say, okay, you're exaggerating. It was just a fetus, so how can you believe that it was going to become an engineer? People in childbearing age, they need follow. Those who want to be mothers, for example, who go through miscarriages also need our empathy and sympathy because they are also mistreated and misunderstood. Therefore, to talk about abortion is to bring this into the sphere of daily discussion, right? In addition to this silencing, do you also find experiences of solidarity in building support networks to be able able to have reproductive justice.
En mi trabajo como acompañante,
trabalho como
I work
acompanhante
as a
das
support
mulheres, me
person
faz
for
ver
women.
que na
This
maioria
work
das vezes
makes me
as
see
mulheres
that
estão
most
sozinhas.
times women are
Então,
alone,
é preciso ter
mostly, so you
lugar
have to have a
seguro
safe
para
place
que uma pessoa,
for a
uma
person, a
jovem,
young
uma
woman
adolescente
or an
possa
adolescent to be
interromper a
able to
sua
interrupt
gravidez
their
e que ela
pregnancy,
possa saber
and
que ela
that
vai
girl can know that she's
ter
going to have
acompanhamento, porque a
follow-up,
maioria
because
das
most of the
adolescentes e das
teenage girls
jovens
and young
elas
women,
não me conhecem,
they
me
don't
conhecem
know me, they
através
know
do
me
celular.
through
Então, o fato
the cell
do meu
phone. So the
trabalho
fact that
existir
my work
mostra que
exists
temos
demonstrates that we
trabalho
do
como
have work
sociedade
as society,
e que
and that
realmente
in
nos
fact
mostra como
it shows
essa
us how this kind of
solidariedade
solidarity
com
with
outras
other
pessoas
people, for
é
other people, is
importante.
important.
Dolores, a gente vê isso
We see this in your work, some of the hope for women who connected and are able to become empowered. Where do you think that these networks come from, these possibilities for connection and empowerment amongst women, and to create empowerment itself?
Yes, yes. It is something that I've wondered often. I wondered this when writing Earth Eater, but I really felt, at least at that time, in my neighborhood, I felt that it would have been to contaminate the character with my personal experience. In Argentina, we have a network, an aid network to help people, and there is a book they published a book called The Pink Manual, in which this group of supporters that support people that want to make an abortion. And when they tell these stories, we had grandmothers that would start crying because they would talk about the fact that they had had an abortion, and they would tell us when we would set up this kiosk in a park in Argentina of this network. And they would break down in tears talking about their own experiences, and they would tell that they had never told anybody that they had had an abortion. And we're talking about 80-year-old ladies. And Earth Eater, the character, lives in the peripheries of my city in Buenos Aires, and this character will meet other girls that are looking for help. She's not that alone in her home. She doesn't suffer such stigmatization as being called Earth Eater. Misery reaches out and finds other networks of girls and women that accompany one another, that support one another, and they accompany Misery, this character, this girl. With Lula disappears, this network is activated. There is a support network. Trying in my own activism, I should never interfere the voice of my characters. I wanted to erase myself, me, Dolores. I wanted my characters to live their own experience, and they would reach to the place where they had to reach, reading things or living situations. They would live as characters that could be similar or different from mine. And I wanted to focus on how women accompany one another, the deep, deep friendship amongst women from different ages, as the lady that sells bread, or Tina, another character, women that are totally different from Earth Eater and Misery, women that come from different cultures with other knowledges, that had never gone to college, but they have these type of knowledge which is transmitted through generations of women. We have grown up listening to the fact that other women say that women can't be friends because they always compete and they are jealous or they have envy. There is a strong construction that I've heard it so often. And I've also wanted to talk about this, about the importance in life of women in other women's lives. I wouldn't be here if it had been for Gabi Ford Camara, Selva Almada, my teachers and professors that listened to me, that encouraged me, that supported me one way or other. So in my life, in our lives, we have the presence of other women, network of women that support one another. And this is not so much a topic in literature as friendship amongst boys, men. I thought this was an outstanding topic. And in my scenes, I don't want to talk about the relationship of Walter and Earth Eater, brother and sister, but I wanted to focus on women friends, Mystery and Earth Eater and other diversities that become friends and build a very interesting network of interventions.
Okay, time is relentless, and time is blinking at us. Apparently, there wasn't enough time to address the question, but I would not to end without talking about the possibility of friendship, strength, empowerment amongst women, and I'm certain that literature connects people. I have this experience in the book club all the time of increasing and have more women readers who talk about the themes that interest us, whatever the themes are. So I want to thank you both for being here. And thank you so much indeed. Thank you very much for everything that you've done and all your work. So congratulations and thank you indeed.